Going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Beyond Ordinary podcast, where we connect with great people doing great things to inspire you to do the same. Got another banger episode today. I got my boy Jahmaal. Met him over at Podcast Movement. We had to hop on and do a collab. How you doing today, good brother?
Man, I'm doing awesome. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing good. Doing good. Long day, but yeah, we got to get it done. We got to get it done.
Yes, sir.
But before we dive into it, man, like, you mind introducing yourself to the people? Let them know what you do.
For sure. So I'm Jahmaal Marshall, also a podcast host. So Listen and Speak is my podcast. My website is listenandspeak.com. But I tackle burnout and stress at the root with proven methods to 2x your time and maximize your productivity. I'm a counselor, certified counselor, consultant, and public speaker. So that's me, yo.
Oh man, we got so much to talk about. But you was just telling me off camera that you got a speaking gig, man. Like, how did you secure that?
Actually just networking, man. The thing about it is when you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. And I know you know your audience. And so I always say KYA. That's why I love talking in hashtags, know your audience. And so knowing that the people who come into my DMs, who listen to my podcast, who hire me, who bring me on in the corporate or whether it's an individual contributor, it's people who are really struggling with stress and burnout. And most people who are burnout, they hear that word. They're like, I ain't burnout. I'm good. I hustle hard. It's just like, you do,
Right.
And so with you think about the for-profit community, it's huge, but it's huge also in the nonprofit community. And it's really subtle because most of the nonprofit community may or may not be faith-based, or it may be mission-based. And so it's all for the mission, all for the faith. And those are the people that have the biggest compassion fatigue. And if you think about for-profit, which is corporate, what drives that. It's all about the revenue, all about that
All
bottom
about the
line.
revenue. As soon as you burn out, we bring on the next person who's not.
Come on now. And you may hear the people are the best asset, but that's just rhetoric. Where's the reality? And so really helping companies and leaders bring that reality into their team. So not only do they preserve bottom line, but they also preserve institutional knowledge. Because again, when your learning and development walks out the door, there goes your onboarding. There goes over hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue that you have just shot yourself in the foot. Sometimes you got to talk numbers to speak to the right people.
Oh yeah, most definitely. You gotta show people the numbers. But yeah, I actually have been doing some reflection myself. I've been doing my show for about 4 months now, and I've been doing about once a week, thinking about ramping up to twice a week. But Howard Homecoming is in about 2 weeks. So leading up to that, I told myself, you know what, I'm gonna take I have a decent sized backlog because I've been recording so many. I literally have 2 recordings on Friday, and I might have a possible third. He just gotta get back to me with scheduling, but I'm gonna take 2 weeks off to just really just sit back, relax, recharge, reevaluate how things are going and stuff like that. Because I think part of burnout is you just keep going, and you just don't even realize what's happening. So I just want to take that 2 weeks to obviously I'm still going to be posting content, posting what's in my backlog, but not really take on any new recordings until probably early November.
That's part of marketing and business 101 is to not only skill stack, but also content stack. Batch that content so that way you already have it ready. And I think a lot of people, when they hear the word burnout, it can be very surfacey. Like, oh, I just need a break. I just need a vacation. Let me tell you something, and we'll probably get into this more as we get into the meat of the conversation. You cannot sleep away burnout. You cannot bubble bath or bead bath your way out of burnout. It is a issue from the inside out that starts in your subconscious mind that has to do with the younger version of you. Your audience is probably like, what are you talking about? Y'all gonna find out later.
Absolutely. So in terms of what made you want to help people with their burnout? How did you get in this lane?
Man, I think about my own story, man. I think when it comes to stress, high burnout, or any type of addictive behavior, because you can be addicted to your work and what you do, there always is an underlying issue within the subconscious. And though all your audience may not be able to relate to this, I grew up in a house with one parent who was absolutely divine and another who was mean enough to be Satan himself. And so my father was a former crack addict, heroin addict, and alcoholic. And so a lot of unpredictability on home front. When he came home, I never knew which James Marshall was walking through that door, whether it was the sober James who was coming home from work just a little tired, or James who was high, who was drunk, whose eyes were bloodshot red, and who could be very violent and unpredictable. And so when you grow up in a house like that and things can get volatile within the snap of a finger, you learn to not kick up the dust. You learn to not trouble the waters. And when you live your life like that, it affects every facet of your life. And so you fast forward, it affects the romantic partners you choose. It affects how you work your job. It affects how you are as a student, how you are in college, even how you do your profession or how you run your business. And so I was a type who was excellent at all things because I didn't want to give. I had such a deep fear of rejection from growing up in an abusive household that I didn't want to give anyone a reason to reject me. So I became a chameleon. I became the jack of all trades and the master of quite a few. And it
Hmm.
worked because for me, it felt safe. A lot of people right now, you hear the word, we both live in DC. You hear the word high achiever, high performer. I, I struggle with that word because I know that 90% of that high achievement and high performance is a trauma response because I've lived it.
Hmm.
And so, just even in a part of my story as a professional, after I had already, gone through my healing process, the first phase of my healing process, because it is a process, I became a counselor myself, had a full
Hmm.
caseload. I was also managing a remote program with other contractors who were counselors, putting together curriculum for them, and I was also speaking publicly. And so one day, the one of the directors walks up to me, pulls me into his office, and he says, "There's a problem.
Hmm.
Some of the clients don't feel like they have enough access to you." And I'm like, what? I'm thinking you have got to be kidding me. I've gone out of my way to make sure everyone who is here feels seen, feels heard, has a great experience. Is really the clients here are really leveling up, that they're not leaving with the same problem they came here with. I made myself one of the most accessible staff members. And then I had to think to myself, Myles, I was like, is this a merit to what he said? And then
Right.
I had to own my part in the journey of like, I created this narrative of meeting every need, and it was came from my own need to be needed because I was excellent in all things. And so the moment I took a break or took some time to myself, people were blown away by that version of me because they weren't used to that. They were used to the yes
Hmm.
man, you know. And so after that, even being in that very high stress environment, I
Hmm.
had to actually go back to the drawing board and go deeper into my process. So with more masterminds, more books that I began to read, even more counseling and mentoring I began to go through. And I got to see, Jahmaal, there are things that trigger and elicit certain responses in you that you need to be aware of. And so that's when I had to, first develop trigger awareness. It's like, why does that trigger that type of response in you? And why have you created this narrative? You've actually made this mess for yourself, and now you have to clean it up. Because I still hadn't dealt with the root cause of what was driving me. No matter what anyone tells you, we still come from a hunter and gatherer society. Your hunger is what drives you.
Hmm. Some things I want to go back and touch on that you talked about is you said that, or you had mentioned your upbringing and being in a hostile
Mhm.
environment with your father. So I want to ask you, how, if somebody is in a hostile environment, let's say, let's give two scenarios, say like they're at home and or they're at work and they are in that environment, what advice would you give them to help overcome that and better their situation?
I think there's some situations that, at that time, because I grew up in that, it was a little different for me because children are the greatest recorders, yet the poorest interpreters of information. So I didn't have really language for what I was going through at the time. And because I had a parent, and no shade to my mother, I honor my mother. She's an amazing woman. There was, in a sense, no escape. He was the financial provider for our family because he always provided. We never went without. And so I would say for someone who's growing up in an environment like that, one, tell someone. I felt like I had my mother and some other people to confide in, but I was often embarrassed by his drug addiction,
Mm,
embarrassed by his alcoholism. So, and because things were so volatile, I didn't want to embarrass him, you know, even though it was in a sense kind of widely known, how he could be. Um, and so being a kid, it was a little different. As an adult, you have some agency in where you go. And so I, in a sense, was left to absorb that and then left to be the man of the house, which caused me to grow up a lot quicker than I should have. I was told many times, "Oh, you're the man of the house now." It's like, I'm 8 years old. I'm supposed to be out like playing with
yeah, playing
Matchbox
outside.
cars. What do I know
Yeah.
about being a man of the house? Um, but I would say, for the child or the early teenager that's going through that, make sure you don't carry that alone. I'll say that. And I would say for the adult who's working in a
Mhm.
toxic environment, I can get to that a little bit later, but learn, and I'm not going to say with confidence, because confidence is different from awareness. Learn with
Mhm.
awareness how to confront the bully. whether it's your direct manager, whether it's their manager, and when you're aware, not when you're confident, because confident people can be very foolish. When you're
Yeah.
aware of your surroundings, aware of them, and aware of yourself, you know how to speak to it in a way that turns the situation in your favor.
hmm Yeah, I think that's major key is that awareness because if you don't have awareness, there's absolutely no way for you to better your situation. But you had said if you're a child, do not carry this alone. What do you mean by that? Can you expand on that point?
Yeah, I would say always have another adult or adults that you can confide in. Because a lot of times, if you think about, like, I wasn't sexually abused or anything like that, but
Right.
children who end up in those situations, they often don't say anything because they don't know, either they don't have language for it or they feel like I can't tell anyone. And then they carry that and they bottle it up. Have an outlet for it. Because if you don't have a healthy outlet for how you are feeling, you will soon develop an unhealthy outlet because you got to take those feelings somewhere.
hmm Absolutely. And so I know we spoke off camera about what you want to talk about. Now you want to talk about the corporate environment and whatnot. So can you just briefly give your experience in working in a corporate environment and some of the struggles that you went through and how you overcame them eventually?
Got it. I can speak to both the corporate and the nonprofit because I've worked both of them.
Oh,
They
for
both
sure.
have their benefits and they both have things that are very hard about them. I think in the corporate, of course, when it's hyper corporate, you have the benefit of you get paid a lot more,
Facts.
like right up front. But there may not be the investment in you, specifically the person, and it can be a lot harder to navigate the different personalities and staff because, in a sense, when you're in a corporate environment, it's like dog eat dog. Everybody's trying to save their own neck. And unfortunately,
So,
even if you go to a nonprofit, whether it's faith based or non faith based, we are still, at least here in America. I know I have a global podcast. I think yours may be reaching that global audience. Here in the West,
mhm,
it's people still carry those corporate principles over into their nonprofit. And so you can have some of the same toxicity,
mhm,
where it's like either this is a service, this is a ministry, this is a mission, or this is a business. And most, if not, I'll say all, most run like a business and most run like a corporate business. So you have the same issues. And most of it is lack of communication and fear. I think a lot of
mhm,
people think when I put on fellas a pair of loafers or ladies a pair of heels and walk through that door, I become this booming professional. Please remember that you still carry you wherever you go. Yourself, your belief system, your family history, your biases, your addictions. Yes, you carry all of that through the door. And if you're managing people, that trickles down to them. And so part of that is learning to first manage yourself. We hear a lot about emotional intelligence, but I find a lot of people who train in emotional intelligence aren't that emotionally intelligent themselves. I see
bro.
them in their own comment sections like popping off, and I'm like, aren't you supposed to be the one training people about managing their emotions and managing
Yeah.
others? It's like you learn like when to go in and you learn when to pull back. And so I would say in both the corporate and nonprofit, the matter of miscommunication at different levels is a issue that I feel is cyclical, and it
Yeah.
can, you see that cycle trickling down at every level. And then bottom line starts to walk out the door. We've heard of what in the last 3 years, that quiet quitting. A lot of people
hmm
say, you know what? I don't really need this. I got to walk out. There's a great resignation. And then also in the turn of economy, we have another problem. We have the great stay. People stay in a toxic job because they feel like I don't have anywhere else to go. If I don't keep this job in this economy, where else am I going to go? So these are some of the issues I think that corporate people are facing. And when it comes to stress and burnout, most leaders, if you think about how management works, even in corporate and in some nonprofits, the path to promotion is what? Managing direct reports. Where a lot
Yeah.
of people, if you think of about the way functioning like you and I, they're creatives. They're just meant to be subject matter experts. They're not meant to manage 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 people. They're like, hey, put me in my little corner office, corner cubicle. Let me just do what I do well. I don't want to manage other people, but that's forced on them. And sometimes they're also managing people who used to be folks that they went to happy hour with. So how do you create a boundary and a dividing line between somebody who you were once close with? And when it comes to learning and development, training is just not designed to address those things that are happening internally with the individual. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So if training isn't the answer, then what is it?
Well, part of the work I do is going into organizations on the individual level. My desire and what we've been doing is changing people one leader and one team at a time. First addressing the
Okay.
leader and then addressing the team needs, but addressing it from the inside out. See, a lot of
Hmm.
times when you survey, people are still presenting you with a bucket. And what is that bucket? It's full of fruits, apples, oranges, bananas, plums. It's good, but that looks really pretty. You turn
Hmm.
those things upside down and you see the root, that's where the ugly stuff is. But that's where you want to address the issues. What is going on in the subconscious mind with these employees? What is going on with these leaders? What's going on at the executive level that's trickling down? When you get down beneath the surface and address the root, all the fruit, all the systemic things will take care of themselves.
So if someone, like, everything that you're saying makes sense, right? And to me, it just sounds like such like common sense. Address your problems inside and out. So why do these organizations struggle to address these issues themselves and have to bring on a third party person, like as such as yourself, to help fix these issues?
I would say one, some because people don't want to address it.
Okay.
When it comes to growth, growth is a choice. Change is inevitable. I don't really like when I see the word change. I've heard, hey, you
Really?
look really young for your age. Like in 2 months, I'm going to be 40. Most people don't know that.
Really?
I would
Oh,
tell you
wow.
this.
Good
Praise
job.
God.
Well, let me get your skincare routine. Shoot.
Funny, man. In 40 plus years, I would like to think that at some point my reflection will change. Unfortunately, change is inevitable, but growth is actually a choice, and organizations have to
Yeah.
choose to want to grow. They have to actually, leaders need to actually see the numbers and see the fact that, hey, on your bottom line, I don't care how many people you keep bringing back into the organization, how much you shuffle the deck, you are literally shooting yourself in the foot. And so once they see that, you got to speak numbers, and they see, okay, this is an internal issue. And I would say sometimes when you bring a third party in, the third party is a mediator, because a lot of times amongst one another, it's almost like with a married couple. They know each other really well, but they need that third party there to actually bring out what is going
Hmm.
on beneath the surface and how to
Someone
get the
that
people
is unbiased.
communicating.
Yeah.
That's it.
For sure, for sure. So I had this question. I'm sure that you address like mental health and stuff. And so when somebody hurts themselves, breaks their arm or whatever, you obviously when physical things, accidents happen, you know what the solution is. However, when it comes to mental health, that's not something that could always be so visible. So I was to give you a little backstory. I was in this situation where I was dating this girl and she told me she was depressed, right? But on the outside, like everything seemed fine. You know what I mean? Like she got up fine every day. She went to work, went out with her friends, all this other stuff. But she was, taking medication for her depression. And I was for lack like I feel like as someone who was dating her, I didn't provide her with enough support that she needed. However, I didn't even know how to go about that. So how would you so my question to you is, how should somebody go about helping somebody else with their mental health struggles, and supporting them through that?
One, I'll say the first thing you do is refer them at least to a specialist, someone who
Mm-hmm.
specializes, who can walk through those muddy waters with them. Um, I'm trained as a clinician, you know, but there are certified clinicians who are psychiatrists who they understand the levels chemically what a person may need if they're dealing with depression. And there's different types of depression. You know, you ever
Mm-hmm.
heard of seasonal affective disorder? Sometimes people just get depressed in the winter months, and the rest of the year they may be fine. And so there's depression that doesn't need medication. It just needs to
Right.
be addressed at, okay, well, how do we reposition you where during this season we can still place you where you thrive? And so, one, I would say for that person who is dealing with depression, don't carry it by yourself. And I would definitely say for guys, because typically we're on the front lines of a lot of things, but we're the last ones to seek help. And I'm so
Mm-hmm.
glad that the stigma is being broken on men's mental health. And I want to even specifically say black and brown men's mental health, because we're sometimes the last ones that will seek help.
Absolute last.
Don't
Yep.
be that person that carries it by yourself. There's even an ancient proverb that says pride goes before destruction. Don't be that guy with the hardest head where you have to have a soft behind because you landed yourself in a pile of quicksand that you made from procrastinating on getting the help that you needed.
Yeah, yeah, that's big. People going and seeking resources. I've been to therapy many times, mainly because for me, I'm trying to be solution oriented. You know what I mean? I'm no shame telling somebody that I've been in and out of therapy for several years for several different reasons, and that stigma, that stereotype didn't necessarily affect me. But I really hope that those that do need, the help that they seek, the help that they need, because it is hard out here, and it's only getting harder with the economy getting worse and worse, inflation, all that stuff. And so you gotta. I just had a conversation with one of my guests, Phil. He specializes in, or he's been studying Stoicism, that philosophy, and part of that philosophy is just being able to control what you can control. And so recently, I've been just trying to focus on the things I can control, which is really just myself, taking care of myself and making sure that I am okay. Um, Another thing that I've been learning too is that emotions are just feelings. You don't have to act on emotions. And emotions are also come and go. So I know that if I'm sitting and stewing in a negative emotion, yeah, right now I am in discomfort, and our bodies are wired to always seek comfort. But
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to condition myself to be like, okay, you feel discomfort right now. You have these negative emotions. Just sit in there, feel them, acknowledge them. Don't try and suppress them, and then they will eventually fade, and then you'll be fine again. And then just think to yourself that you got through it. So
That's
that's
it.
my piece
Feel
on
the
that.
feels. Girls and guys, feel the feels
Mm-hmm.
and make sure you address them accordingly. Because if you continue to run from them, you'll only run back to what is familiar, therein reinforcing the insanity, which is that cycle of doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
Absolutely, man. People doing the same thing, expecting a different result. Can't do it. Can't do it. Always got to make a change. Got to make a change. So I wanted to kind of touch on, I think, your what you were talking about in terms of lethal loyalty to corporate. You want to dive in a little further into that? Did were you lethally loyal to your corporate job, or what has been your experience with that and some of your patients?
Yeah, I would say anyone, especially those who are naturally empathic, where you naturally have an externally facing desire to see other people win and you're very giving, that can get exploited. And that lethal loyalty, the way it manifested itself in me was I was the first one to get to work and the last one to leave. Always very dutiful, just always the one who they could count on me to make it happen. He's a dependable one. He's the rock star. That's the stud. And, because of my own internal brokenness, at the subconscious level, like I ate that up. That only fed that monster in me to even perform even at a greater level. Now, for a company, like that's a great thing. For an individual, that can be the kiss of death because you
Mm-hmm.
live and die and identify with your performance. That becomes your identity so much that you have no identity. You are lethally loyal to said vision that you have no vision for your own life. And that
Mm-hmm.
lethal loyalty ended up in resentment because you still have some expectations connected to that loyalty. You still, as you're sowing so much, you think, well, I'm going to reap something. And when you don't reap in the way you've expected, which is, part of life, there's going to be let down. Slowly, seeds of resentment get planted. But again, that's where you have to go back to ownership. What narrative did you create, did you put out there that built that expectation in other people of you?
I think what it is people are trying to perform their best, especially in their corporate environment, because they want to get that promotion. I mean, that's pretty much the only reason why you get promoted. You're not going to get promoted for any other reason outside of performance. So I think people
I
kind
wish
of
that were
get their
true.
identity. Huh?
I wish that were true.
I mean, yeah, there is nepotism and stuff like that's out there, and that happens. But I mean, for the most part, at least from a practical standpoint, which obviously corporate isn't practical, nor is the world practical. But you want to control what I was saying earlier, control what you can control. So if I'm over here trying to climb the corporate ladder, what I'm going to do is, perform, do what you said, be the first one in the office, last one out the office, always be useful, and, network my ass off to whoever I need to in order for them to put in a good word. So it's kind of hard to get away from that when, your goal of getting promoted requires you that of you.
Right. Where I'm going with that is where that lethal loyalty places you in a position where you are not taking the needed time off to refuel. We've heard it said
Okay.
before, but I actually want to flesh it out. You cannot, and at some point, you will not pour from an empty vessel. You can try, but you're only going to run yourself into a brick wall. And when you run into that brick wall, for some people, they'll seek help before it happens. My clients that are very self-aware, they've done better help. They've done the cheap stuff already. And they're like, okay, I'm actually ready for some real systemic change. And they see like, wait a minute, this is actually more of a drain. This is more of a weight than it is a wing, And so understanding that, yeah, there's a certain level of high performance, quote unquote, I use that in quotes, required for the promotion. But they're also, if you think about even subject matter experts, it takes an amount of creativity that comes from your brain. And a well-rested brain is highly creative. Let's not forget that.
Oh, amen to that, for sure. That's why I was telling you earlier that I'm trying to take that 2 week break to rejuvenate, because I know internally, like, I'm fine. I'm not burnt out or anything, but I just want, one thing that I noticed about myself in going into 2023 is that I was on go mode so much to the point where I wasn't stopping and reflecting. And life happens and different goals pop up. Like, I posted on Instagram not too long ago that I didn't have starting a podcast on my goals. And what I did in 2023 is, as my goal, life happened and goals changed, or my path changed. I didn't change my goals, and then I would get to the end of the year and I wouldn't hit my goals, but that was because things didn't, like, circumstances changed. So that's why I'm always trying to practice reflection. I think that's a good regular practice for people to have, for sure. I want to get more into your podcast, man. What made you start your podcast? What is your podcast about? Give the people a little more about that.
That's a very interesting question, because like, I was not looking to become a podcast host at all. Part of my story is that I wasn't on social media before 2020. Didn't have a Facebook, didn't have an Instagram, didn't have a LinkedIn. The LinkedIn I had was really a place to store my resume. A LinkedIn, to me, I thought was just pretty whack. I was like, what's a LinkedIn? Put my resume on there to make sure a recruiter can find me, and that's it. And in 2017, what people don't know, they hear the bad part of the story with my dad, but there's a redemptive side. In 2006, God found him. He gave his life to Christ. His life completely changed radically, and I have clients who have all different belief systems, but I am unashamedly a Christian. You don't like it, ain't nothing I can do to help you with that. But I know his life was radically changed, man. And over the last, I would say, 3 years, we became like really, really tight. So my worst enemy became my best friend. But 2017, he had a major stroke. And that's when I came from out of the full-time counseling, public speaking, and I was doing in the Midwest. And I resigned from that, and I came back home. He got critically ill 3 days after I got back. And then for 2.5 months, we lived in a hospital. And he passed on December 5th, 2017. It'll be 7 years this December. And so I went through a really dark time where I hated God. I hated Jesus. I hated the gospel. I hated just even all the families that had changed as a result of my counseling, my work, my teaching. I questioned all of that. And so for a whole year, I didn't work at all. I did some volunteering here and there, but I turned down jobs. I went into major depression myself. And so I would start going into nature, and because my whole prayer life was just dropping F-bombs. That's all I knew to say and pray. It was very raw. It wasn't anything I can repeat on this podcast, but it got to the point where I started going into the civil war force we have here in DC, and I started praying again. And so after I would pray, I would have a thought for a minute and a half, and I would just whip out my camera and literally talk to my camera, share a thought with myself. I started posting these thoughts on LinkedIn, not thinking anything of it. And people just start watching. And so a group by the name of the Safety Justice League said, hey, we want you to come on our podcast. And I had gotten a job at this point a year after, to the date of when I left my other job, working in investigations at a nonprofit. And I was just like, they said, your title says global lead, but we can work with that. And so they asked me a little bit about my job. And then we got into like the videos I would drop. A group in Pennsylvania called Launch Kits heard that, and they said, hey, we want to sponsor you a spot, a web domain. And that's where Listen and Speak was born. And the female, when I was on that podcast, it was 3 dudes and 1 girl. She said, are you a podcast host? I said, no, I don't really get down like that. She said, you should be. You're a natural, man. And I said,
Mm.
so they heard that. And one of my mentors, who was a Jewish man by the name of Rob Jollis, who was actually at Podcast Movement,
Oh,
he
wow.
said, I want to sponsor you at Simplecast and get you a mic. This very mic I'm speaking on, he bought for me. And so it's like I wasn't going after listening this week. It was actually coming after me. I felt those things had died with my father, but they were very much still alive, laying dormant, waiting to be reawakened. And in 2020, they got reawakened. I did my first episode with him. He's a 5-time best-selling author. And he said, I want you to call me afterwards. I have some feedback for you. I was super nervous. He says, man, I've done thousands of these. Because, I mean, he's a 5-time best-selling author. He says, I
Yeah.
will put you in my top 20. He said, you are a natural. You have a way of pulling out things in me that people just don't ask.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about, being a counselor. You have to pull out things that other people don't if you're going to get your clients any results. And so I started using that as a podcast host to really draw out of my guests like what no one else asked them. And so that's been my secret sauce.
Wow, man. I'm not gonna lie, that's one hell of a story. That what you were doing now pretty much blossomed from a dark time where, went from, it's just a roller coaster ride, going from your father being abusive, and then he found God, and then y'all started getting close, and then right when the relationship pretty much was getting better, I mean, he just got called home. And from there, you are thriving podcast hosts because of it. It's crazy that he and God had that in store for you. And that's one thing that I've been trying to keep in mind, that sometimes like you just don't see it. You don't see all you can see is the storm that you're currently in, and you don't see that there's something on the other side of that storm. And the sucky thing is, like I was saying, that like as humans, we're always trying to avoid pain, and we're trying to avoid it. And probably the worst thing about being in the storm like that is that you don't know when it's gonna last. It could last 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, and that's the scary part. We have all that uncertainty, and that's something that I put on, or was at least alluding to on one of my posts, about my journey to podcasting. My journey to podcasting, it wasn't as severe as losing my father. Thank God. I actually literally called my dad earlier today, and I try to thank him as much as possible and give him all of his flowers while he's alive. I don't want to lose him one day and think that, damn, like I wish I had told my dad I loved him. We tell each other we love each other every single time before we get off the phone. Like, and I know everybody don't got that kind of relationship with their dad, or their dad is pretty hard. But my father, he's a good man. He's a great man. But what I was saying is that I went through something similar, where I went through a dark time, hard time, tough time, and I ended up picking up podcasting, and it's been a blessing ever since. Just being able to learn from people, learn something new from every guest. And I have a journal too, and where I journal like my thoughts, my days, things I've learned from guests, and I'm just using it as my little time capsule. And one thing too that I was like, oh, that's dope that happened, is that you were talking about how you were basically making those recordings. You were recording to yourself, and then you eventually posted it. So I have a written journal, and where I write in, and I've actually had it since 2018. So like I pretty much have all my thoughts about my day since 2018 to now. But recently, as of like probably like about a month or two, I've been like doing those video journals, just vlogging, just trying to get my thoughts out. And I'm not gonna lie, I high key I do it to prevent myself from doing something that I'm gonna regret. I'm like, bro, let me just get this all out on camera, talk to myself. I upload it in my Google Drive, and I delete it later. And I'll title it something. But maybe one day I'll have the courage to maybe cut some of those up and post them and be like, hey, this is what Myles was thinking on this day. I ain't a perfect dude. And that's honestly why I started this podcast too, because I wanted people to see real and raw stories like yours. Like, you know what I'm saying? People might see, oh wow, Jahmaal getting flown out and has his own podcast and has his own business, and he's a speaker, and he got it all figured out. But little did they know that all this success came after a really tough time. depression that you had. So I greatly appreciate you for sharing that.
Myles, man, I can tell you the journey has been anything but linear. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of times you think about the places that we live, at least digitally, you see the people see the highlights. And
Hmm.
I'm very busy. I can tell you I don't watch a lot of TV. And so rarely I can count the last time I actually was able to sit down and watch a good game. So most times I'm
Mm,
watching like the 8 minute YouTube highlights. If you think about NFL, that's a 3 hour football game full of
yeah.
flags, full of all sorts of
Timeouts,
different
halftime.
plays, full of timeouts, full of booth reviews. Cause sometimes that happens when you get right down to the wire and red zone booth reviews. I'm like, man, especially when it's against my team. I'm like, come on, y'all. You know,
Yeah,
that's our lives though. If you think about injuries, that all of those things are represent in a sense our life. But like in 8 minutes, YouTube and ESPN is not showing you that because one, they have a limited bandwidth that they can put out there. And two, people have limited attention spans. And so the
absolutely.
we most of what we're seeing are the highlights. And I'm liking to give people the raw behind the scenes. Like this is what happens when you don't see. And a lot of things that have happened in the journey of loss and change and transition, I wouldn't have written it that way. There's an ancient proverb that says, man plans his way, but God orders his steps. I've had a perfect plan, a perfect vision written out, and God has shattered that and frustrated that, but he's put me where I need to be to have the impact that I was created for.
Absolutely, man. So going back to that time, like what were you doing to help get yourself through that time when, your father passed? I think you said it was like 2020 or something like that. You dove into a depression. What were you doing to help get yourself out of that state?
Well, it was into 2017, most of 2018. A lot of it, I would walk out in nature. I would pray. I was able to do something called grief share with my mom and my youngest sister. So
Mm,
that helped me to process stuff. But a lot of it was also just engaging with different people in community that just listen. When someone goes through grief, I'll say this to your audience, don't give them a lot of unsolicited advice. Learn how to commit to the ministry of presence. That means just being in the same room and just listening. They ain't really asking you for no advice. They just want you to listen and know you're there. And I was thankful to have a good core group of people who just were there. They didn't tell me nothing because I didn't really want to hear anything. If you'd have said something to me back then, you would have got a whole lot more than grace and peace. I say that at the end of all my videos. That wouldn't have been what you would have received, you know? And so I would say just those things, being in nature, getting a lot of vitamin D, praying, and those prayers didn't always sound like Hallmark card prayers. Processing information outwardly and then being surrounded with core people who just listened was really cathartic and healing for me.
absolutely. Hey, I love walking around. Man, that's one of my favorite pastime activities. Actually, that's when I call my dad today. I take a walk, a midday walk anywhere between like 12 and 3. And I do it because one, I work from home and do everything from home. So like if I genuinely wanted to, I probably could go like grocery shopping for a week and then stay in my crib and not leave for like 7 days. But I don't know. Anytime I go to over 24 hours without going outside, I feel kind of like claustrophobic or something. And also just I like getting fresh air. And one frame that I like to have is that one day I will not have this mobility. And I will have wished that I could walk around the way I
Mm,
walk around now. So that's why I make sure to take that daily walk every single day
come
to
on,
keep the blood moving. So
come
I'm,
on
I'm
now.
glad to hear that, those nature walks did you well.
Oh man, I'm no cap. I mean, they can't see this. They can't see my watch on here, but this thing has over 5 miles for the day and nearly
Oh, wow.
13,000 steps. So yeah, we do this thing daily.
13,000. Hey, that's great. I ain't check what mine is, but yeah, I walk to and from my gym is like walking distance. So I'll walk to and from the gym, and then come back, kind of relax, and go back out for another walk. Sometimes when I'm really like in my bag, when I'm really feeling something, I gotta do a double take. I'm like, ooh, I'm feeling something right now. I gotta go and take another walk before I crash out. Oh man. Coming to the end of the interview, man, is there anything else we didn't touch on, we didn't talk about that you would love to talk about?
I would say for your audience, for anyone who's hearing this, especially if there is any indication of stress, burnout, you sense that you may be hitting the wall, or you are really in your bag right now. You feel like you have that sense of invincibility. There's going to be a freebie that I dropped to Myles. It's called Three Tips to Mitigate Burnout. All you got to do is sign on. You'll get that. You'll get that download. Check that out because that's got very, very practical tips on one, how to develop trigger awareness, two, how to understand how you think, and three, how to find a different escape route. Many of us are used to doing the same things because the brain is programmed that way. And if you are corporate, if you work for corporate, or you are the CEO yourself and you say, you know what, my team needs some help from somebody that can get them some results. Myles will also put my Calendly into the show notes so you can find my contact information.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jahmaal, so much for coming on to the podcast. Where can the people find you at?
Easiest place to find me, if you just type in the words listen, then speak, my name will pop up. As you can see, I have a very unique spelling to my name, Jahmaal. If you Google me, it's really easy to find me. But the easiest place to get linked into me is on LinkedIn. That's where I run the hardest, and that's where I do my business. But I'll put all the social media handles of the Instagram and everything like that into the show notes. So, but
Absolutely.
link into
For
me
sure.
on LinkedIn or go to my website, listenthenSpeak.com.
Hey, thank you so much, Jahmaal, for coming on the show, man. Hey, people, if you need help, you know where to get help. Beyond Ordinary Podcast. I'm your host, Myles Youngblood. Had another great guest. Hopefully, it inspired you to be great yourself. Till next time, peace.